for this webinar. So as Satali said, I am in the Department of Economic and Social Affairs and the Division for Sustainable Development Goals. We've recently had a little renaming and some reform in the department, but basically DESA is the secretariat for the High-Level Political Forum, and the High-Level Political Forum is the main intergovernmental body responsible for the follow-up and review of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. So the HLPF meets annually, and it is responsible for the follow-up and review, the progress in the implementation of the agenda, and it does that through so-called thematic reviews, where it considers every year a set of goals in greater depth, and here you see the set of goals that will be considered in greater depth at the HLPF in July this year. And so that's one part, thematic review during the first 5 days of this 8-day forum. We look at the member states, discuss progress on these goals. The idea being that while there's a focus on these particular goals, we don't lose sight of the indivisibility of the agenda and the linkages, the interlinkages with all the other goals. So for practical purposes, the HLPF has, beginning in 2017, and then this year and next year, working its way through the 17 SDGs. Now, SDG 17 is reviewed every year, given its central importance as the goal dealing with means of implementation and the global partnership for sustainable development. So that's really the HLPF's main task in the first 5 days, and then in the 3 days at the ministerial level, the forum engages or conducts so-called voluntary national reviews, which are sort of a key component of the follow-up and review part of the agenda. But this time, instead of the sort of typical political, follow-up and sort of examination by member states in New York, it's really a more country-level granular review by countries coming forward to share their experiences and their challenges, so that sort of a complement to the higher level review of in-depth review of the goals. And this is obviously voluntary. Countries pick how and in what manner they want to conduct the review, and also the goals that they wish to focus on, but we'll say a bit more about that. Now, the draft program of the HLPF is there. The link is there, so you can see how these goals are going to be looked at. Different sessions on interlinkages, on science, on the regional perspective, so clustered around this in-depth review of these goals that will be taking place. So that's a little bit about the HLPF as an institutional mechanism and its main function. In my next slide, just to say about the Voluntary National Reviews, the main point, they're a learning experience. They're not akin or really homologous to a peer review. It's not that one set of countries is reviewing another set of countries. It's really that countries as equals volunteer to step forward, present the challenges they've had, the progress they've made, and hopefully with backed up by a robust national preparatory process, and that looks at both successes as well as some of the shortcomings in implementation. The idea being to learn and share with other member states, with other countries and stakeholders as well. And given that the agenda is universal, this is a main point of departure from the Millennium Development Goals. The SDGs applying and being embraced by all countries, whether developed or developing. Therefore, conducting these VNRs is an understanding that national circumstances are important. So the countries that this review takes place, cognizant and sensitive to the national circumstances of countries. And of course, state-led, but by no means stopping there. So, as with the agenda itself, which was, born in the context of stakeholder engagement and a lot of involvement from CSOs and the private sector too, the same idea carries through to the VNRs, that they should be that they should be carried out with a lot of involvement from stakeholders. Now, of course, the VNRs, for a country to carry this out, usually under some time pressure, and to do this thoroughly is a commitment of resources, human and financial resources to do a thorough job. In many cases, this is, of course, in most cases, this is a first time. So there's sort of the breaking the barrier of doing something new, finding coordination mechanisms, organizing within government, reaching out perhaps to stakeholders in a way that wasn't done before. So all of this is quite a large commitment and effort on the part of government. So what are the benefits that one can see from this process? And of course, one of them, when we speak to countries and hear what they say at the meetings we hold with them, as well as at the HRPF itself, is that it's sort of a catalyzer to get things moving, to get different stakeholders involved. It also means that countries have to conduct a stock taking to see where they are, to map the Sustainable Development Goals against the country's policies, looking for gaps, and looking at especially also gaps in terms of data availability. And then on the issue of coordination, the carrying out of a thorough and credible voluntary national review requires a lot of coordination, and sometimes there are existing mechanisms that the government can fall back on. In other cases, it's a question of putting in place such mechanisms, and we see in many cases very high-level commitments, so officers tasked by the Prime Minister or the President with technical working groups or other high-level coordination bodies which drive the process forward. That's a feature in many countries. But this coordination, of course, within government and is an ongoing challenge in many cases, and that's what sort of is brought to light in the VNRs. And countries will say that's one of the big benefits when they get this right, when the challenge and the pressure of the VNR can really lead to government departments talking to each other and tackling the task together. And the idea being that the Voluntary National Review isn't just a end in itself, the preparation of a glossy report and a good presentation in the HRPF, but that really has intrinsic benefits in terms of facilitating coordination, identifying areas for support so countries can note areas where they might need support, and also honestly as a communication tool within government to citizens and society. It's an opportunity to really take the agenda, out of the sort of halls of government and bring it down to local government, to provincial governments, and also interaction between government and stakeholders. So those are some of the benefits of the VNRs. And how are these? How are these conducted? What are the sort of parameters for the reviews? And they're pretty wide, because in keeping with the notion of voluntarism, there are voluntary national reviews. Countries are not undertaken according to a schedule or a prior commitment, as for instance with the Universal Periodic Review, where it's the expectation that all countries carry out such reviews. Here, it's really the spirit of stepping forward and volunteering. But nonetheless, the Secretary General has prepared a set of voluntary common reporting guidelines with a minimum basic framework to promote comparability and consistency in the report. So that's really one of the aims to ensure we can compare reports and try and get some consistency over time. But nonetheless, each country, if we look at the reports, we see quite a wide variance. Some stick more closely to these guidelines, and others make some adjustments to enable them to most effectively carry out their review. And importantly, I want to say here, these initial guidelines, which date from 2016, were amended in 2008 by the Secretary General. It's an update and not a full revision of these guidelines by any means. And some of the new points that came about in this update relate specifically to this backbone principle of leaving no one behind, this rather awkward acronym we've now invented, LNOB. But nonetheless, this principle really, which sort of in many ways is a complement to and sort of a guiding principle, I would say, for many of the goals. So we find a place and really pay attention to things like inclusiveness, equality, dignity, and of course dealing really with those that are in the most extreme circumstances of poverty and deprivation. So in a sense, to remind us always to go beyond the averages or the aggregate figures, and to really look at the most vulnerable and marginalized populations when analyzing a situation and when designing and implementing policy. So that's really something which the guidelines encourage countries to cover either as a separate section or as a cross-cutting theme. And then also the guidelines sort of invite countries to cover all SDGs, so that the reports, especially if it's the first report by a country, the first Voluntary National Review, that provides sort of a snapshot on all the SDGs, so that we don't pick and choose, even if the country then does decide to cover a certain SDG or a number of SDGs in greater depth, that there's an overall coverage of the goals. Now, just briefly on some of the lessons learned, we've had two sets of voluntary national reviews. The first in 2016, 22 countries came forward. These were really, held 7 months after the adoption of the 2030 agenda, which of course was in September 2015. So a very short period of time to prepare, and we see that some of the reports and countries have told us very initial, a signal of commitment to the agenda, but nonetheless a quick uptake from in that year. And then of course last year 43 countries stepping forward to conduct the VNR. So by then we have a good sample of countries and reports and experiences to look at. And I should say also here that one of the tasks or one of the roles the Secretariat has undertaken to support the Voluntary National Review process is a series of workshops. So workshops held, usually 2 workshops held at the global level with the Voluntary National Review countries to familiarize them with the process, with some of the lessons learned, to enable peer learning between those that have conducted reviews and those that are coming forward for the first time. So we have usually 2 of those workshops that are organized, as well as workshops in the regions to look at regional specificities, and again just to bring all countries up to speed and enable them to have a successful and presentation and preparation process. So that's sort of where we also draw some of these lessons from, is both from the reports but also from the interaction, what we hear from countries at these workshops. So of course it's fairly obvious, but it bears saying again that starting early is really critical, because even with well-laid plans, we find that it's issues such as coordination, structures, either reanimating them or reviving them if they exist, adapting them if needed, or creating new coordination structures. It's time-consuming, can be sometimes a little bit contentious. Finding ways to reach out to stakeholders if that's perhaps not that familiar, if government's not that familiar with that on a day-to-day basis. These all take time. So we do say that it's really important to really get an early start. So let's say those countries that are presenting in 2019, there's no time like the present to really start the preparations. It's also super important to designate early on some coordinator or coordinating entity that holds the pen. And very often we see that there's some sort of degree of handover of the writing of the report to a consultant, which of course for governments in resource-constrained environments under time pressure is understandable, but it's really important and that there's ownership by the government. So that consultants can add a lot of value in technical areas, in polishing, but that it is really essential that the government hold the pen, guide the process, and really decide on the priority. So that's really really important. And then of course some of the reports have become quite long, and we do think it's better to focus on quality and not so much length. And again, something which we're trying to encourage countries to look at, and which highlight in the guidelines by the Secretary General is to focus on explanation and analysis. what's most useful for a reader, for another country, for stakeholders, for anyone reading a report is really trying to identify cause and effect relationships. Trying to see if we can see why policies worked, why they didn't work, as opposed to listing plans and strategies and leaving it there. So that's more difficult. We recognize that's more difficult, but it also adds more value. And of course, covering strengths and weaknesses, so the credibility of the report and the process is heightened when there's an honest attempt to also look at areas that were less than successful. And since the report is of a narrative nature, there's the option to include a statistical annex with infographics or more data that can be used there to back up the main part of the report. And lastly, I don't want to spend too much time here. Very importantly is this idea of the report itself beginning to spell out the next steps in implementation, so that we don't put all this effort into the Voluntary National Review, come to New York, and it's a good experience, and then we go back to as things as we did them before. We really want that to be the report to be, and the voluntary review process to be a means of implementation, be something which really spurs and boosts implementations, that countries commit themselves already in the report, in that process, to the steps to be taken in implementation going forward. So lastly, to round off, what I wanted to say and share with you is that we've developed in division a handbook. Now the handbook is really a practical guide, a starting point, adding to and structured along the lines of the Secretary General's guidelines, and just as I said, sort of initial how-to for the VNRs, and that is available in English and French and Arabic at this point, and hopefully soon also in Spanish and possibly Russian. So it's very much a basic how-to, and fortunately there's a lot of other information now available, analysis from think tanks, stakeholders that have looked at what's going on. So there's a lot of additional material that's come to light and is available. Just two other points I would like to mention. One is on the process. So as I said, for this year, for 2018, 47 countries were basically oversubscribed. But for 2019, the VNRs for 2019, the list is open. So we have some 20 countries that have already stepped forward and a few waiting in the wings. And it's up to the president of ECOSOC, of the Economic and Social Council, that person, that diplomat, that high-level official convenes the HRPF, and it is for them to decide the final number. But a number around 40 is probably a safe assumption. So that doesn't leave that many slots left. So if you're from a government or in touch, working with a government that is contemplating a voluntary national review, it would be a good time to take action and notify the president of ECOSOC, and that's usually just a formal letter communicating the government's decision, and that is sent by the permanent mission in New York to the head of the president of the council here. But the main thing is, once that decision is made by the competent authority in the country, that's communicated to their mission here, so the formalities are taken care of. Let me just go forward to a time. We had a timeline here. So this is the basic timeline, and you see the next sort of mile marker for the VNR process is really the 18th of May, when countries are expected to submit what we call main messages, a short sort of summary of the headline messages from the review at that point. Some countries may still be honing and polishing their report and their review process, but at this stage, just to communicate the sort of emerging main messages, and then these are put online. We also aim to provide a short synthesis of these main messages, but this is a way to communicate to stakeholders, to other member states, to partners, the main messages from the review, because of course the full report should be in by the 15th of June, but it's quite a lot to ask for anyone to review all of those and extract the gist before the the HLPF meeting itself. So that's just in terms of the next steps for countries involved or country teams involved in supporting governments that are presenting and aim to present. And then just to, as I said earlier, to bear in mind that it's a good time to step forward for 2019 and even for 2020. A thorough review process is time consuming, and if it's linked to something like a national plan that has a certain end date or a time a new national plan is being developed, it's a good time to begin feeding in and thinking ahead on these topics. But I'll leave it there and look forward to answering any questions in our discussion. Thank you. Over to you, Stali.
Great. Thank you so much, Friedrich, and that was very insightful as well. I listened to this presentation earlier in the day, then there are also things that I picked up in this time as well. So thanks for that. And we had a few people join, so I'll just ask those that joined while you were speaking to introduce themselves in the chat. If you could just type your name and the organization you work for, that would be great. And Friedrich, we already have some questions from Morali. So if you look in the chat, I can either go through them, or if you've already looked at them in the chat, then you could pick up and respond.
Yes, so I see the questions here from Morali, and let me take them one by one as I read through them. So the first question, as we can see here, about the HLPF participation, and Morali is quite right. The HLPF per se, so the meeting in July, is open to all countries. So the HLPF is a universal body, so that means all UN member states participate, and it's a universal body. So that's certainly the case. And also, I should say, of the sort of UN structures, quite open to civil society participation. Of course, it's a member state body, but it has a long tradition in the sustainable development field of civil society participation. So during the Voluntary National Reviews, there's a period for question and answers with member states, and while time is quite short, there's also the opportunity for what are termed major groups and other stakeholders, so civil society representatives, to pose questions to the VNR presenters. So there's that to bear in mind. Now just to turn back to the focus of review, I would recommend looking at the full program for the HLPF that's online. So that shows you the sort of breakdown for the first 5 days. There's a session essentially dedicated to each of the goals that's under in-depth review. There's a session on the regional perspectives when we have reporting from regional forums that have been held, not really preparatory, but sort of regional forums looking at sustainable development issues in their region. Tomorrow we'll have the kickoff of the forum in Dakar for the African region. Recently concluded those for ECLAC for South America, and then ESCAP and last week in Beirut for the Arab region. So these fora feed in, and the main messages and sort of outcomes are reported there. There are also sessions looking at the science policy interface, the situation of countries in special situations. So quite a mixture of things that are taking place of broader interest, well beyond just the goals that are in focus. And then it is the last 3 days of the HLPF, 16, 17, 18, that are essentially dedicated to the voluntary national reviews. So I think that is the first question. And yes, so the annual event, exactly. So for now, the HLPF has you might call it a work program. At least it has the goals that will be reviewed for this year and for 2019. That's in a resolution 7299, but it's also on our website. So sustainabledevelopment.un.org, sustainabledevelopment.un.org. And then the HLPF tab has all the details on 2018 and 2019 fora, including those goals under review and recent documentation. So there will be an HLPF all the way up to 2030, but in 2019 the General Assembly will review the first the first sort of the first years of the HLPF, the 4 years dealing with the agenda and the 2030 agenda, and then might make some tweaks or changes. Might decide on a different program to review the goals and so on. So that's coming up in 2019. But certainly the HLPF should be around and it is the main follow-up mechanism for reviewing the 2030 agenda. So that won't change. And what is the role of prime ministers in it? Permanent missions? Yes.
No.
PMs, permanent missions.
Sorry.
Yes.
Permanent missions, yeah.
Yes. So basically, what is it? All countries are free to participate in the HLPF. So letters are sent out informing member states, a note verbal essentially saying, inform us of your delegation and so forth. But it's really to be proactive. The essence is to be proactive. For countries to decide at what level will they be represented during those 5 days, how active will they be in intervening, because those sessions there's no speakers list. It's essentially, whoever's there can press the button and intervene. So it's really up to countries to decide how active they wish to be in the HLPF. Let me just scroll back up to come to the third question. Oh, that was the question number 4. So the CSO participation. Okay, so the participation is partly on ECOSOC accredited CSOs, but also those that participated and had status with the old Commission on Sustainable Development, which was the forerunner of the HLPF. So that its last meeting in 2012, I believe, the CSD had a set of recognized major groups that were called, and they've been grandfathered into the HLPF. And the civil society has a self-organizing mechanism whereby they they decide on who speaks in which slots and how, let's say, which questions are going to be posed and who poses them during the VNR session. So it's a self-organizing mechanism, and we have in our INDESA a branch that facilitates their participation in the HLPF.
Yes, thanks, Frederick. I think yes. So that covers the questions from Morali. There's a question from Kim from Water for People. And she's just saying that they work in 9 countries. They work closely with national governments, and the 9 countries that they work in, none of those countries is participating in the VNR. So she's asking a question about how are there talking points they can use to support and encourage VNR participation in the future.
I don't know if the talking points as such, but I would encourage our colleague to have a look at this handbook. And also, I think maybe extract something. I don't want to blow my own trumpet, but extract something from the presentation, some of the benefits. I mean, it's really, and I think also I don't want to say it's low risk, but it's really an opportunity for countries to highlight progress, And as with any set of countries participating, there's a spectrum in terms of thoroughness and so on. But I would say that it's really a opportunity for countries to profile their progress and every country, I believe, has something to tell. Every country is, as someone has said, one of our German colleagues at some point, when it comes to the 2030 agenda, we're all developing countries. No country has all the answers on all these goals. So some may have made historical progress on some of the poverty-related and social goals, but on the environmental goals or others, there's a lot of work to be done. So I think that's one thing would be to look at, I also think peers. When I look at some of the countries that step forward, it's often that the regional peers have come forward, to say, from a sub-region of let's say Africa or in Asia, countries are stepping forward. Then I think that's a good message. Say if they can do it, we can do it too. And also every country has a story to tell, and even it can't all be shiny and rosy, and that's okay. You know, it doesn't have to be. We don't have to only have progress. And another point is that, you know, we're only now 3 years into the agenda. It's not as if we can and must show dramatic progress. It's sort of, you know, some of that progress may have begun before the adoption of the agenda, and it's also an opportunity to really have a dialogue with partners and show the seriousness and commitment of a country. So I think there's many good grounds, but of course it is a matter of volunteering. So in as much as we can give the country the information, it always has to be their decision. But if there's a way to communicate some of these points to the country, I think that would be a wonderful thing. I mean, there's a large group of countries, let's say from Africa, but I think also in Asia, that haven't yet stepped forward. I mean, if we look at Latin America, most countries have essentially have done a VNR, and some are coming back for a second review.
Great, thank you so much. Friedrich, would you know whether organizations like UNICEF, sort of how they are involved in the process, or even other UN agencies, or this is purely through those national structures if they're involved at that point?
Well, I mean, I think I would say that from my experience, the countries, the program countries, or essentially many developing countries, rely very heavily on the UN country team. You know, the UN country team is, in our experience, the sort of the first port of call when they begin to prepare a VNR. You know, some have a lot of internal resources, you know, whether from universities, but many of them will turn to the country team and say, how do we begin to grapple with this? You know, can you help us with, whether it's a technical aspect or sometimes it's stakeholder consultation? How do we structure this? So I think that's where the country team is and UN agencies are really primarily involved, because and I think that makes a lot of sense. And let's say for UNICEF on something like Leave No One Behind, you know, if that's going to be a strong thread, and it should be in the VNR, then issues around children and of course around health as well and so on are strong messages that should be in the VNR. So I would really think that as much as possible, if there's any opening at the country level, it's for the agencies to really step forward and say, you know, we have this or that information or input that we can provide to the process.
Great, thank you so much. So if there are any more questions, please still put them in the chat or pick up the mic. I just wanted to also acknowledge that we've got Rinchen from Bhutan, from the government of Bhutan on the call as well. Rinchen, in case you wanted to say anything or to contribute, since Bhutan is doing a VNR this year, we would be happy to pass on the floor to you. And I think that your computer has got the audio. The audio should be working okay. So let us know in case you wanted to say anything.
Maybe while we're waiting, I would just say that I was privileged to visit Bhutan in February this year and benefit from the presentation on the Bhutanese VNR report. So and then a colleague from Bhutan was in the meeting we held in March in Dakar, who presented the progress. So yeah, just very happy to have a colleague from Bhutan on the call, and I hope the final polishing of the VNR report is going well.
Great, so glad to hear that, Friedrich. I think that we have a problem with the audio for Rinchen. It now says that it's paused. So now if he's able to come back into the call, that would be great. So anyway, I just wanted to highlight a few slides before we finish. And these slides are just to link with some of the already ongoing work that we know for sure are happening within SDG 6, particularly targets for drinking water and sanitation. And we just thought that this conversation, the process around the VNRs can actually also benefit from the work that has already happened So, for example, countries that prepared their country overviews ahead of the sector and finance ministers meetings last year, those might be also a place where maybe some of the most recent information might be. And as you would recall, the structure of those country overviews looked at the SDG vision for the country, whether the country had already sort of aligned the SDGs to their national plans. And then there was also a component looking at the building blocks, or rather the key elements of the sector, and specifically the idea was to look at the extent to which the sector building blocks were fit for purpose, not just in terms of saying there is a plan, but are going to the extent of finding out whether that plan actually responds to the issues that are in the SDGs. Whether it was developed in a multi-stakeholder fashion, or whether there were even challenges or gaps that were identified and how those would be responded to. So we just wanted to highlight that that might be helpful because it was already done by countries, but also obviously the other more recent pieces of information, including the responses that countries provided to the GLASS survey, which covers a lot of information on both building blocks, but also just more on the enabling environment for the sector. And then the JMP provides very recent estimates of the baselines, so that too might be a very good place to start. In fact, the JMP also has got very specific country information, not just in the main report that was published in June, July, but also on their website. They've got specific places where each country can actually find some very useful charts that reflect information on the indicators to the extent that the data is available. So we just wanted to highlight that. And as Friedrich was saying, that the timeline now is that the next big milestone is on the submission of key messages or main messages, and we thought that it might be worth for the SWA focal points, government and other agencies as well, to perhaps just check with maybe the designated coordinator in the country in terms of what key messages are emerging, and see the extent to which those incorporate water and sanitation. And then there's obviously the main report to be submitted in June, which means that there isn't a lot of time to perhaps input into that, as we have heard some of the countries were already had drafts in March. But perhaps in that process of engaging around the final report, there might be some opportunities towards the end. Finally, during the HLPF itself, SWA partners are organizing a number of events. So let us know if you will be in New York, or if you know somebody from your country or institution, or if you know somebody from the sector or institution who will be in New York for the HLPF. Would like to make sure that we provide them with information about events. Morally, I know that CSOs are planning, or rather have submitted a proposal for a side event on accountability. So in case you wanted to speak to that, would be happy to give you the floor to speak to that. But that's one of the side events that will be that we know that our partners are working around. There's also potentially a side event prepared by WaterAid and other partners on the links between WASH and nutrition, and specifically looking at health as well. Looking at health, we are also intending to organize an event off-site. So we haven't submitted this as a side event, but we might have it outside, say in one of the hotels. The proposal is to do a breakfast meeting on the lessons around follow-up review and accountability for the SDGs, and we want to do this event with other partnerships such as Scaling Up Nutrition, Every Woman, Every Child, which is an initiative within the Secretary General's office. The Global Partnership for Education have also been approached, and so this might be an event organized with other partnerships to look at the lessons from their processes in terms of how they do their review and follow up at country level, and also how we do that in the WASH sector, especially now that the SWA will be rolling out the updated accountability mechanism. So I just wanted to highlight some of these events, including also we've heard of other events related to private sector that might take place. So if you'll be in town, please let us know. And also if you have any interest in some of these highlights, let us know. Morali, I wanted to check whether you might want to speak to the CSO session on accountability, the proposal that was put in. I mean, we could pass on the floor to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chintali, for this opportunity. I would like to share that from the civil society side, we have proposed for a side event. The title of the side event is Why Robust Multi-Stakeholder National Accountability Mechanisms are Essential for Achieving SDG 6. Is the title of the side event, and tentatively this is proposed for 11th of July, if I remember correctly. And then the governments which have agreed to co-host the side event are Nigeria, Sri Lanka, and Costa Rica. And the SWA partners are Water Supply Sanitation Collaborative Council, and then the Watershed Partnership Consortium, FANSA, EWP, etc. I think all the key network players from the civil society sector are partnering to organize this side event. I think as it is quite explicit in the title of the side event, it's mainly talking about the accountability, inclusive accountability mechanisms required at the country level. And the part of the session, it's proposed to be a 90-minute side event. Part of the time of the event is also going to be dedicated for sharing the study carried out in different countries on the current accountability mechanisms on SDG 6. So I think that is what I can say briefly at this juncture.
Thank you so much, Murali. Yes, that was very clear, at least to me. Thank you so much for that. Are there any questions or comments to that? Okay, so I hope this has been helpful. I found it very insightful, and I just wanted to thank Friedrich for spending time with us today in the earlier webinar that we had for Africa and other countries and partners in Europe and in America, and also for spending time this evening with us as well. So I wanted to say thank you. I also wanted to thank all the participants, our colleagues from Bhutan, Morali and Kim, Luke. We lost Wamba, who had joined from Cameroon in the process. But as I said earlier on, we will share the recording with partners that have not joined. So in case you wanted to circulate this more widely to some of your colleagues, we'll be happy to do that. And we will also share alongside their recording, also put the presentation as well. And so thank you so much, and we will be in touch. Friedrich, I'm not sure you have any closing remarks. We'll be happy to get any sort of parting words, things that we
parting words of yes. Great wisdom. No, just thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to being in touch with colleagues. And I said, if you have any questions or follow up, please, about the HLPF, about the VNRs, just do route them to me, and we'd be happy. Either I or my colleagues would be happy to respond. But thank you very much, and very good to be talking to you about the VNRs. It's good to involve as many as we can, and then spread the word, as it were.
No, indeed. Thank you so much. That's great. So, Morali will definitely give you the recording, and thanks for offering to share widely in South Asia. We appreciate that. So thank you very much, and do have a good day for those of you starting your day, and have a good night Marisa, Kim, and Friedrich.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Luke, would you? Oh, he's gone. Okay. Rinchen, are you still there?